In the kitchen bathed in morning sunlight, Melissa Carter took a sip of coffee while checking her schedule on her smartphone. 7:45 a.m. She had to leave for the office in 15 minutes. "Ethan, breakfast is ready." Melissa called toward the stairs. "You're going to be late." Melissa was known as an excellent agent at Willow Creek Real Estate. Her photo was displayed on signs all over town, and her smile, along with the catchphrase, "I'll find your dream home," was famous locally. The sound of small footsteps coming down the stairs could be heard, and her 10-year-old son Ethan appeared in the kitchen with a sleepy face. His brown hair was still tousled from sleep, and his blue pajamas were wrinkled. "Good morning, Mom," Ethan said in a small voice as he sat down at the table. Melissa placed a bowl of cereal and milk in front of her son and kissed his forehead. "Did you sleep well?" Ethan merely nodded and began to eat his cereal silently. Melissa noticed her son's downcast demeanor for a moment, but remembering today's schedule, she pushed the thought aside. She had an important meeting with clients. The Bridgewaters were looking for a luxury property, and closing the deal would be her biggest transaction of the year. "James, it's time to go." Melissa called for her husband. James entered the kitchen dressed in a gray suit, adjusting his tie. He was a senior designer at Modern Space Architects, a well-regarded design firm in Seattle. The buildings he designed had won several awards, and he had a high reputation in the industry. "Good morning," James tried to kiss Melissa on the cheek, but she had just brought her coffee cup to her lips, so he headed to the table instead. In the past, they would have chuckled at such small misunderstandings, but now they continued their morning ritual in silence. "I'll be late today," James said, taking a bite of toast. "I have a meeting for a new project." "Me too," Melissa replied while stuffing documents into her bag. "I have a meeting with the Bridgewaters. It's a big deal." James merely responded with and began checking emails on his smartphone. Melissa felt a small disappointment at her husband's reaction but didn't show it. They used to be interested in each other's careers and encouraged one another, but lately, it felt like they were walking separate paths. Ethan sensed the invisible tension flowing between his parents as he ate his cereal. He was a smart and sensitive child who keenly perceived things even when they weren't put into words. At school, he was quiet and unassuming, but he loved reading, especially books about science and space. He didn't have many friends, but his classmates thought he was kind. "Ethan, aren't you going to borrow some books from the library today?" Melissa asked, glancing at the clock. Ethan nodded slightly. "Maybe." "Well, I'll give you some money then. If I'm running late, join the after-school program. Either your father or I will pick you up." Melissa took a $10 bill from her wallet and placed it next to Ethan's lunchbox. She gently drew her son closer, but noticed Ethan's body stiffened slightly. Recently, he had been avoiding physical contact with his parents. "Are you okay?" Melissa asked. "I'm fine," Ethan answered without meeting her eyes. Melissa sensed something was different about her son's behavior, but felt rushed as she looked at the clock. "Well then, let's go. Is everyone ready?" The family of 3 hurriedly left the house. Their home was a 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, characterized by a well-maintained lawn and white fence. On the surface, it was the perfect home for the perfect family, but there were slowly widening gaps within. James got into his car and waved to Ethan and Melissa. "See you tonight." Melissa and Ethan got into another car and rushed to school. In the midst of the morning traffic jam, Melissa glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror while gripping the steering wheel. Her son was silently gazing out the window. "Ethan, how's school lately?" Melissa tried to start a conversation. "Normal," Ethan answered briefly. "Are you getting along with your friends?" "Yes." Melissa almost sighed but held back. Ethan had never been a chatty child, but recently he had become even more quiet. She remembered receiving a communication from school that he couldn't concentrate during class. Last week, she received an email from his teacher, Mr. Brown, but had put off replying due to being busy. "If you have any worries, you can always talk to me," Melissa said. "Mom and Dad are always on your side." Ethan just nodded. When they arrived at school, Ethan quickly got out of the car, said a small bye, and walked toward the school gate. As Melissa watched her son's retreating figure from inside the car, she was overcome with an anxious feeling that she was missing something important. However, looking at the clock, she was already running late. She shook off the feeling and drove to the office. "I'll talk to Ethan properly tonight," Melissa told herself. "When work is over, I'll pick up a pizza on the way home." Despite her resolution, her mind was already filled with thoughts of today's meeting. To successfully close the important deal, she mentally rehearsed what she should say and which properties to present. Melissa was smiling at the Bridgewaters in the office conference room. Color photos of luxury properties were spread out on the table, and she was professionally explaining the features of each property. "This property has a magnificent lake view and ensures privacy. The custom kitchen is a space where you can fully enjoy cooking, which I know you're fond of, Mrs. Bridgewater." Robert Bridgewater exchanged glances with his wife Catherine, and they smiled at each other with satisfaction. Melissa could sense that the meeting was progressing smoothly. Just then, her smartphone vibrated. Melissa briefly checked the screen and frowned at a call from an unknown number, but decided to ignore it. However, when the same number called repeatedly, she worried it might be an emergency. "I'm sorry," Melissa bowed politely to her clients. "May I check this for a moment?" Stepping into the hallway to answer the phone, she heard a woman's voice. "Mrs. Carter. This is Ms. Brown from Willow Creek Elementary School." Melissa's heart began to race. "Yes, this is Melissa Carter. Is something wrong? Could you come to the school immediately? There's an emergency situation regarding your son, Ethan." Ms. Brown's voice was calm, but there was tension behind it. "What happened? Is he hurt?" Melissa asked immediately, feeling a rush of fear and anxiety. "I can't discuss it over the phone. Please come as soon as possible. We're waiting in the principal's office." After the call ended, Melissa stood frozen for a moment. Worst-case scenarios flashed through her mind and disappeared. An accident? Bullying? Illness? What could have happened? Taking a deep breath, Melissa returned to the conference room and faced the Bridgewaters with an apologetic expression. "I'm terribly sorry, but I've received an urgent call from my son's school. I need to go right now." "Of course, your child comes first," Catherine Bridgewater offered an understanding smile. "I'll contact you again tomorrow." "I'm really sorry." Melissa quickly gathered her bag and documents and rushed out of the office. Getting into her car, she started the engine with trembling hands. She covered the usually 15-minute drive to school in just 10 minutes. On the way, she called James, but he didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying, "I got an emergency call from Ethan's school and I'm heading there now. I'll let you know once I find out what's going on." Arriving at the school, Melissa parked her car haphazardly in the parking lot and ran toward the building. At the gate, she took a deep breath to calm herself and gave her name at the reception. The receptionist stood up and said, "I'll escort you to the principal's office." Walking down the hallway, Melissa felt something strange about the surrounding silence. The classes must be in session. Children's colorful paintings and crafts decorated the walls, but they now seemed oddly ominous. The principal's office door came into view. Melissa's heart was beating so hard it felt like it would leap out of her chest. The receptionist knocked on the door and announced, "Mrs. Carter is here." "Please come in," a woman's voice said from inside. When Melissa entered the room, she saw the school principal, Ms. Morris, Ms. Brown the homeroom teacher, and Ethan, shivering in a small chair. Melissa immediately rushed to her son. "Ethan. Are you okay? What happened?" Ethan didn't look up and remained silent, wearing his cap pulled low. Melissa gently placed her hand under her son's chin, trying to lift his face, but Ethan stubbornly resisted. "Mrs. Carter, please have a seat," Principal Morris said quietly. Her expression was stern, but compassion shone in her eyes. Melissa sat down in the chair next to Ethan and looked at Miss Brown. "What on earth happened?" Ms. Brown pointed to a paper bag on the desk. During class, Ethan suddenly said he wasn't feeling well and went to the bathroom. When he returned, he was wearing this cap. Since Ethan usually doesn't wear hats indoors, I thought something was off. Ms. Brown hesitantly continued, "When I approached him during break time, Ethan started crying, so I removed his cap." She took a baseball cap with the school logo out of the paper bag. "Please look at this." Melissa glanced at her son and then cautiously took the cap. Her eyes widened in horror. The inside of the cap was covered with sticky red liquid stains. She immediately turned to Ethan and put her trembling hand on her son's cap. "Ethan, let me see." Ethan shook his head slightly, but didn't have the strength to resist. When Melissa carefully removed the cap, she saw red liquid sticking to Ethan's brown hair. The first word that came to her mind was blood. Panic seized her, making it difficult to breathe. "Is this blood?" Melissa asked in a trembling voice. "No, it's not blood," Ms. Brown quickly answered. "It appears to be red paint. But Ethan won't tell us how this happened." Melissa exhaled and regained some composure. "Not blood. But why was there paint in her son's hair?" She crouched down in front of Ethan and grasped his small shoulders with both hands. "Ethan, what happened? Who did this to you?" Her voice was gentle, but anger lurked beneath. Ethan's lips trembled, and tears welled up in his large brown eyes, but he said nothing. He just shook his head slightly. "Did someone bully you?" Melissa asked again. "If you tell Mom, I can help you." Ethan just kept looking down in silence. This silence further tightened Melissa's heart. "We tried to talk to him, but Ethan won't tell us anything," Ms. Brown said apologetically. "We asked the other children too, but they say they didn't see anything." Principal Morris spoke up. "Mrs. Carter, I recommend you take Ethan home today. We'd like to check the situation again tomorrow. If we get any information, we'll contact you immediately." Melissa nodded and stood up. "Thank you. I'll try to talk to him slowly at home." She took Ethan's hand, encouraging him to stand up. Ethan slowly stood and held his mother's hand tightly. Feeling her son's small hand trembling, Melissa's heart ached. On the way from the principal's office to the parking lot, Melissa tried to talk several times, but Ethan remained silent. Seeing her son walking with his hat back on, hiding his face, Melissa felt a deep anxiety. After getting into the car and fastening their seatbelts, Melissa turned to her son. "Ethan, when we get home, let's wash your hair. And when you're ready, I want you to tell me what happened." Ethan just nodded. As Melissa started the car, she looked at her son's small figure in the rearview mirror. Something was seriously wrong. And she had an intuition that this was not just a child's prank. She needed to get home and learn the truth. The next morning, after a sleepless night, Melissa was making coffee with a foggy mind. Yesterday, even after washing Ethan's hair, he wouldn't talk about what had happened. He didn't eat dinner and retired to his room early. James returned home after 10 p.m. Even after Melissa explained the situation, he merely said, "It's probably just kids' squabbles. He'll forget about it tomorrow," showing little concern. After Ethan went to school, Melissa decided to take the day off work. She explained the situation to her boss over the phone and had the meeting with the Bridgewaters postponed until next week. She felt she should focus on her son's problem today. Something is happening. Ethan might be threatened by someone, Melissa thought, looking out the window. She entered Ethan's room and began searching for clues. A neatly organized bookshelf, several Lego models on the desk. Looking under the bed, she found only a dusty soccer ball and a toy box. Opening the closet, she saw casual clothes and school uniforms neatly hung on hangers. She remembered there was a box on top of the shoe rack where Ethan kept his secret treasures. Melissa took out the box and opened it, but found only a collection of stones and baseball cards. Where else? Melissa muttered. She opened the desk drawer. Stationery items like pencils, erasers, and markers were neatly arranged. Reaching for the second drawer, she found several school notebooks stacked together. Taking out the top notebook, she saw "Science" written on the cover. Opening it, she found class notes in Ethan's meticulous handwriting. Nothing unusual. The next notebook was "Language Arts." This too was a normal class notebook. The third notebook had nothing written on it. When Melissa casually opened it, the first page was titled "Letter from Olivia." Her eyes widened as she began to read. To Ethan. I think you're really nice. You always seem to be thinking about something during class, which is very interesting. Would you like to read books together at the library after school sometime? From Olivia Wilson. Melissa repeated the name. Olivia Wilson. She continued turning the pages. There were several more notes from Olivia. All were friendly in content, praising Ethan's drawings or commenting on what he had said in class. They were innocent messages from a girl beginning to develop a crush. However, the last note had a different tone. Ethan, I need to talk to you about your father and mother. Let's meet at the playground tomorrow. Olivia. The date was 3 days ago, the day before the incident. Melissa frowned. What did this mean? She took out her cell phone and called Ms. Brown, Ethan's homeroom teacher. Ms. Brown, this is Melissa Carter. Do you have a moment? Of course. How is Ethan doing? He still won't talk to me. By the way, is there a girl named Olivia Wilson in the class? Yes, there is. Olivia is an excellent student and well-liked by everyone in the class. Why? I found notes from Olivia in Ethan's room. Are they good friends? Well, Olivia seems to be interested in Ethan. I often see them together. But there's no problem. Rather, I thought it was a good influence on shy Ethan. Melissa thought for a moment before asking, do you know anything about Olivia's mother? Mrs. Vanessa Wilson. She's very active in the PTA. She's always at the center of preparing school events. She's a very beautiful, confident woman. Melissa felt something bothering her. Thank you. Just one more thing. Was there anything unusual yesterday? Between Ethan and Olivia, or with the other children? After a brief silence, Ms. Brown said, I didn't notice anything in particular. However, I might have seen Olivia's brother, Thomas, saying something to Ethan yesterday. It was during break time. But since it was just a conversation between children, I didn't pay much attention to it. Melissa suddenly became interested. Thomas. What grade is he in? 6th grade. He's Olivia's older brother, but he's quite the opposite of his sister, a bit rough around the edges. After hanging up, Melissa searched for the PTA directory. Finding the Wilson family information, she made a note. Vanessa, her husband Greg, and their children Thomas and Olivia. The address was about a 15-minute drive from the Carter home. Driven by curiosity, Melissa searched for Vanessa Wilson on the internet. She quickly found her Facebook profile and began scrolling through the publicly available photos. Vanessa was indeed a beautiful woman. Long blonde hair, perfect makeup, stylish clothing. Most of her photos were related to family, school events, and charity activities. Melissa casually continued scrolling through the photos but suddenly stopped. A photo from a charity marathon 3 months ago. Standing next to Vanessa was James. They were smiling at the camera, wearing completion medals around their necks. Strangely, James had never mentioned participating in this event. Melissa found another photo. A scene from a school fundraising party 2 months ago, with Vanessa and James talking. And a photo from a wine tasting event a month ago. Again, they were standing side by side. She felt something tightening in her chest. There seemed to be an unnatural intimacy between the two in these photos. It wasn't strange that James and Vanessa knew each other. They were parents from the same school. But why hadn't James mentioned any of these events? That night, when James returned home, Melissa had decided to act normally. She would avoid direct questions and probe naturally in the flow of conversation. "How's Ethan?" James asked, loosening his tie. "He still won't tell me anything. I didn't send him to school today." "I see." James took out a beer and sat on the living room sofa. "Time will solve it." Melissa sat next to James. "By the way, have you met Ethan's classmate's mother named Vanessa Wilson?" James's hand momentarily froze. "Vanessa? Oh, I've just met her at PTA meetings, nothing more." "I see." Melissa carefully observed his expression. "She seems quite active. She appears to participate in a lot of school events." James answered curtly, but his voice had hardened slightly. "I don't know her that well." Melissa hesitated whether to press on. There was clearly something James was hiding in his reaction. But she couldn't be certain yet. She needed to proceed cautiously. "Ethan's teacher says that Vanessa's son, Thomas, was saying something to Ethan." James drank his beer in one gulp. "It's just kid stuff. Don't think too deeply about it." He stood up and said, "I'm going to take a shower," before leaving the room. Melissa was left alone, harboring thoughts of confusion and doubt. Ethan's incident, Vanessa Wilson, and James's strange attitude. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was some connection between them. A few days later, Melissa decided to attend a PTA meeting at Ethan's school. Normally, she would use work as an excuse to skip it, but this time was different. She wanted to meet Vanessa Wilson directly. Entering the multipurpose hall at the school, she saw many parents had already gathered. Melissa looked around the room, searching for Vanessa. She found her immediately. Just as in the photos, a woman with long blonde hair, perfect makeup, and sophisticated clothing was chatting with other parents, surrounded by them. Her laughter seemed loud enough to be heard from across the room. Melissa took a seat and waited for the meeting to begin. Vanessa, as the PTA president, conducted the meeting, discussing school event plans and fundraising. Her way of speaking was confident, occasionally using humor to lighten the mood. "She's too perfect," Melissa thought. Too perfect to the point of being unnatural. After the meeting, Melissa was looking for an opportunity to approach Vanessa. However, there was always someone around her, making it difficult to find a chance. Melissa was about to give up and leave when she heard a voice from behind. "Are you Ethan's mom?" Turning around, she saw a young teenage boy standing there. With brown hair and sharp eyes, he had a somewhat mature air about him. "Yes, I am," Melissa answered. "And you are?" "Thomas Wilson," the boy said concisely. "Tell Ethan I'm sorry." With those words, Thomas tried to quickly walk away. Melissa reflexively grabbed his arm. "Wait. What do you mean? What happened?" Thomas tried to free his arm, but Melissa wouldn't let go. Did you do something to Ethan's hair? Was it you? Melissa asked in a lowered voice. At that moment, a sharp voice called out, Thomas. Vanessa Wilson approached with quick steps. Her expression clearly showed anger. What do you want with my child? Vanessa coldly asked Melissa. Melissa released Thomas's arm and confronted Vanessa. Your son said he wanted to apologize to my son. Was he the one who poured red paint on Ethan's hair? The blood drained from Vanessa's face for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. I don't know what you're talking about. Thomas, let's go. But, Mom. Thomas began to speak. Be quiet. Vanessa grabbed her son's arm and said, It's just children's squabbles. Don't make such a fuss, before leaving, almost dragging Thomas along. Melissa stood frozen. Thomas's words and Vanessa's reaction. Now she was certain. Something big was happening. She felt her heart racing as she headed home. That night, while Ethan was doing his homework, Melissa quietly knocked on her son's bedroom door. May I come in? Ethan nodded. Melissa sat on the edge of the bed and silently watched her son for a while. Ethan had become even more quiet these past few days. There were tired shadows under his eyes, and he smiled less. Ethan, I met Thomas Wilson at school today, Melissa said gently. Ethan's hand stopped, and he dropped his pencil. He didn't say anything, but she could tell his body had tensed. He said he wanted to apologize to you. Did something happen? Ethan remained silent, looking down. Melissa took his hand and gently squeezed it. Ethan, please. Talk to Mom. I want to protect you. But if I don't know what happened, I can't help you. After a long silence, Ethan's lips began to tremble, and large tears rolled down his cheeks. Thomas poured red paint on my hair, he finally began to speak in a small voice. During break time, when I went to the bathroom, Thomas came in and... Melissa held Ethan close, encouraging him to continue. Thomas said, Since Dad is playing with Mom, I'll play with you too. I didn't know what he meant, but he suddenly took out a bottle of paint. Ethan's voice was trembling. I tried to run away, but he held the door. Melissa's heart nearly stopped. It didn't take long to understand the meaning of Dad is playing with Mom. So, you couldn't tell the school teachers? Ethan answered, sniffling. Thomas threatened, if you tell anyone, I'll do something worse. And also, about Dad. Melissa held her son tightly. Anger and sadness mixed within her. Ethan had been suffering because of James and Vanessa's relationship. You did nothing wrong, Ethan. This is an adult problem. I won't let this happen again. After putting Ethan to bed, Melissa steeled her resolve. She needed to check James's cell phone. Usually, she would never invade her husband's privacy, but this time was different. Her son was hurt. James hadn't come home yet. Melissa opened her husband's laptop and checked his emails. At first, there were only business-related ones, but when she reached a folder labeled Personal, she felt her chest tighten. There was a history of messages with Vanessa spanning several months. At first, they appeared to be work-related exchanges, but gradually changed to intimate content. They made arrangements to meet and repeatedly confirmed, "Don't tell anyone." The evidence was decisive. Melissa sat on the sofa and cried. Before anger, a deep sadness overwhelmed her. It felt like the foundation of her family, her life, was crumbling away. The sound of the front door opening could be heard. James had returned. Melissa wiped away her tears and stood up. Tonight, it was time to face all the truths. Melissa, you're still up? James said, looking slightly surprised. His face showed fatigue, but not only that. The shadow of guilt was also visible. "Sit down, James," Melissa's voice was calm. "We need to talk." James noticed something was different from his wife's expression. He slowly sat down on the sofa. "Let's talk about your relationship with Vanessa." Melissa looked straight into James's eyes. James's face turned pale. "What are you talking about?" "No more lies." Melissa opened the laptop and showed him the email history. "I know everything. About you and Vanessa, and what Thomas did to Ethan." James was at a loss for words. He held his head and sighed deeply. "Melissa, listen. That was a mistake." "Is that what you were going to say?" Melissa said with quiet anger. "Because of your mistake, our son is suffering." James initially tried to deny it, but faced with the evidence, he finally had to admit it. It became clear that he had been having an affair with Vanessa for several months, and that this had become known to Thomas, who had taken it out on Ethan. "Get out," Melissa said quietly but firmly. "What?" "Get out tonight. Stay at a hotel, or a friend's house, anywhere. I can't look at you anymore." James tried to say something but fell silent when he saw Melissa's determination. He silently took his coat, packed some clothes in a bag, and left the house. 6 months later, Melissa was making coffee in the kitchen while watching Ethan do his homework in the living room. His face had regained a calmness and confidence that hadn't been there before. "Mom, can you help me with this problem?" Ethan looked up from his math drill and asked. Of course. Melissa sat next to her son and solved the problem together. The divorce proceedings had progressed more smoothly than expected. James had agreed to property division without a fight and was paying child support as promised. He himself seemed to be facing the consequences of his actions. The first few weeks were like hell. Ethan was troubled by nightmares, and Melissa herself spent sleepless nights. However, they had started to move forward little by little. Ethan continued his sessions with the child psychologist, Dr. Parker, and gradually regained his confidence. The situation at school also improved, and he was developing a friendship with Olivia Wilson. The two seemed to have strengthened their bond by overcoming this difficult situation. Melissa joined a local single-parent support group and met other parents in similar situations. Conversations with them helped ease her feelings of loneliness. At work, she reduced overtime compared to before, prioritizing time with Ethan. Even so, her performance didn't decline, rather, her efficiency improved due to better time management. Olivia said she wants to go to the library together after school tomorrow, Ethan said. Can I go? Of course, Melissa smiled. She's a nice girl. Olivia had also been going through a tough time. The divorce drama between Vanessa and Greg had become a big topic in the community, and Vanessa had distanced herself from the PDA. According to rumors, her relationship with James didn't last long either, and James had called her just a mistake. Since then, Vanessa had hardly shown her face at school events. Thomas's behavioral problems had increased, and he was receiving special guidance at school. Melissa learned about this situation through Ethan and had mixed feelings. She felt it was cruel that children were paying the price for adults' mistakes, but she couldn't easily forgive what Thomas had done. James spent time with Ethan on weekends, but their relationship wasn't the same as before. Ethan showed resistance to spending time with his father, but with Dr. Parker's advice, he was trying to repair the relationship little by little. James himself was making desperate efforts to regain his relationship with his son. His reputation at the company had plummeted, and he had been demoted for a time, but now he was trying to gradually rebuild trust. Remember, we're going to see the new house next week? Melissa asked. The apartment was just a temporary residence, and they were looking for a slightly larger house. Yes. With a backyard where we can have a dog, right? Ethan's eyes sparkled. That's right, Melissa laughed. I promised, didn't I? We'll get a dog at our new house. She gazed out the window. Life is unpredictable and sometimes cruel, but still, one must move forward. She and Ethan had overcome this trial and were beginning to walk a new path. Mom, Ethan suddenly said. I'm happy now. Melissa hugged her son, feeling tears on her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of hope. They would face more difficulties in the future. But at this moment, mother and son had grown stronger together and found the courage to move forward. That was the most important thing.